Amy, Tails, and Knuckles are all finally playable in a 3D Sonic game for the first time since Sonic Heroes and Sonic 06 in Sonic Frontiers: The Final Horizon. These new playable characters were something that we had known about ever since the roadmap for Sonic Frontiers was released, but of course their exact implementation into the game was unknown pretty much up until the update came out. Well, I guess unless you looked at leaks, but come on, why spoil yourself like that? Either way, actually playing as these new characters was an entirely different experience than just speculating, and there are a lot of things to love here about these new playable characters. Just the fact alone that we even got them at all is huge for the Sonic series as a whole, but they also had their own full movesets to unlock. So it was clear that genuine creativity was put into making these characters when they could have gone the easy route of just making them all Sonic clones with very minor changes. There's also some things here that aren't the greatest, and I'll get into that, but I largely think that the new playable characters here in Sonic Frontiers were a huge win for Sonic fans, and especially for people that are fans of these characters. I'm going in order of their first gameplay appearance here for this video, so that means Amy Rose is up first. In my speculation video for the Final Horizon, I had hoped that Amy would have primarily used her hammer in her attacks and movement, and while we sort of got that, Amy also uses a lot of old but new tricks for her moveset. Amy's moveset primarily focuses on her fortune cards. She uses them for just about everything, from attacking enemies, to stomping, and even gliding in the air. She also utilizes them in the actual story as well, in a cutscene, so it was nice to see that their inclusion had actual meaning to Amy's character, outside of Sonic Team just wanting to bring the cards into her moveset for variety. Which of course is also nice too, but I think there is something to be said about Amy's lack of hammer usage throughout her moveset. The only times Amy uses her hammer in the Final Horizon are to parry, use the quick side loop, and as a part of her max boost animation. The only real combat application her hammer has in this game is for her parry, and that's it. No attacks where she just swings her hammer, nothing like in Sonic Adventure 1 where she could carry her momentum with hammer jumps, but instead it's relegated to parrying and being in her animations that she primarily uses for non-combat moves. I get wanting to have variety in Amy's moveset, and I think the fortune cards are a great way to provide that, but I also think there could have been a better balance struck here with Amy's character in Frontiers. Like, at least include her hammer in her normal attack combo or something. I mean, it's literally a giant hammer. Why isn't she using it to attack enemies with it? The fortune cards are great for the more magical elements of Amy's moveset, like gliding or even her held stomp, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's not a huge deal. I just personally like to see Amy use her hammer a bit more often than she actually does in the Final Horizon. Outside of her hammer though, I think Amy was probably the best character to have the player start out with, since her moveset feels the closest to Sonic's. She has a homing attack, a stomp with no wind-up animation, and also doesn't have a completely broken flying ability like a certain two-tailed fox does. Amy's platforming sections also feel the most similarly designed to Sonic's, so easing the player into how these new characters feel was definitely best fit for Amy to do. Other than that, I think Amy's gameplay in this update is really solid. It took some getting used to at first, but once I did unlock every move she had, I was able to completely fly across the map, and actually found some cool uses for things like her held stomp that were different enough from the other characters. I think a big design challenge with these new characters was making all of them both unique to play as, but also not too different since they all had to occupy the same open world space. Of course, they all have their own separate challenges tailored specifically to them, but making basic traversal feel good as each character, while also making each one feel special in their own ways, definitely isn't an easy problem to solve. And spoiler alert for the other characters, but I think Sonic Team did a really good job on both of those fronts. Each character has a certain playstyle to them, and I don't think I could pick a favorite to play as, since they all bring their own strengths and weaknesses to the table. Enough rambling about all of that though, I think it's time I move on to the second character that was included in this DLC, and of course, that's Knuckles. Knuckles definitely has a unique playstyle, not that it's necessarily bad, but I don't think he's 100% up to par with previous playable versions of himself. He has a decent amount of competition with both adventure games, since those games have some really good controlling Knuckles. Knuckles here just feels a bit too clunky in comparison to his previous iterations, but I honestly didn't mind it too much since I think the level designers knew that and didn't try giving him anything that felt really awkward to play, considering some of the jank that his character has. If you've played the Final Horizon and used Knuckles at all, you probably know immediately what I'm talking about here, which is his gliding. I went over it in my previous Final Horizon big picture review video, but now that I've played with it even more since then, Knuckles' glide has really stood out to me as a pain point for his character's movement flow. I'm not entirely sure if that makes any sense, but just roll with me for a sec. Knuckles in previous Sonic games, where he was actually playable, of course had his glide, and in those games, as soon as you press the jump button in the air, you're immediately gliding. This isn't the case in Frontiers, which creates a weird and janky disconnect in his character when you're just trying to run around or do any platforming. Notice here how I'm moving at top speed, and when I go to glide, I just immediately come to a stop. But the game still remembers that I was going super fast, so now when Knuckles glides, he goes super fast. If the glide doesn't even stop your momentum here, even though you came to a dead stop in the animation, then why is there even this weird wind up at all? In fact, I've already seen modders take it out of the game, so I don't think it's even necessary to his character. It's just a really strange design choice that was made intentionally, and I can't really think of any good reason as to why. But that isn't my only problem with the glide. Again, comparing this to previous Sonic games, Knuckles' glide is really rough to control if you're trying to make any sort of precise movements with it at all. Turning is almost impossible unless you make big arcs, and I found the best way to turn at all was to just spam the jump button while holding the stick in the direction that you want to go until you're facing that direction. I think this could just be an issue with the player controller in Frontiers, which I've talked about in the past, but also I don't think it entirely is, because when you glide as Amy, her control feels just fine in the air. Man, I really wasn't kidding when I said I'm going to analyze these characters here, huh? I hate to point out the negatives here, since ultimately they really aren't entirely game-breaking or even game-ruining issues, but they're easier to point out and explain compared to the positives of these characters, cause what else do I really say about those? Like, yeah, the good parts of these characters feel good, like Knuckles' max boost animation, or his punch combos, or his climbing. For the most part, I had a ton of fun while playing as Knuckles. It's just some minor issues that stacked up over time, and I noticed them more than the things that I did like, since they stuck out as things that needed improvements. And really that's my entire goal here with even analyzing these characters in the first place. If they were perfectly done, then I probably would have said so in my original Final Horizon video, and not even bothered making this one at all. But since they aren't, I want to point out the flaws that I see, so that hopefully in the future, things are better, even great. I'd love to see more playable characters in new Sonic games that outshine their previous appearances. So once again, long tangent over, but I think it's important to provide criticisms when things need improvement, which is ultimately what I found while analyzing these new characters. Of course, like I said, there's a ton here to love with these new characters, and I know I said I couldn't pick, but I think my favorite one to play as is actually coming up next, which of course is Tails. Tails in the Final Horizon feels like a different approach to his character's gameplay than what we've seen in the past, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, it's just different. Rather than being in a mech or having a near identical moveset to Sonic, Tails here feels a lot more like I would imagine Tails playing as. He uses his machines, and wrenches, but he isn't entirely confined to just himself, because of course he has his Cyclone mech from Sonic Adventure 2 here as well, which makes perfect sense. Of course Tails would use any invention that he has access to in order to help him. Honestly, I just love the ideas that were put behind Tails' moveset in this game, because despite the fact that he doesn't even have a homing attack, I think this is probably my favorite iteration of a playable Tails that we've ever gotten in 3D. Of course, he's got some criticisms, like his flying having a wind-up animation, but at least you can still move during it, unlike Knuckles' glide, even if most of the same criticisms still apply. There's also the stomp wind-up animation that I mentioned earlier, which completely kills the flow of gameplay when you use Knuckles or Tails, and again, this is something not present with Amy or Sonic, so I'm not too sure why they decided to include these pace-breaking animations on some moves. Besides that though, Tails is by far the most broken character in terms of abusing his moveset during platforming, since, you know, the infinite flying machine is here. But I honestly wasn't too bothered by it, and I'm more glad that it feels too good to use rather than being bad. Also, he shoots a giant laser beam from it, which is by far the best attack of any new character here, so how can you not love playing as Tails? And that about wraps up each individual character's analysis that I came to for this update. Amy feels the best for starting with, so I'm glad they chose her for that. Knuckles I think needs some work, but I still enjoyed his climbing and punching segments. And Tails is by far the most fun to just fly around with and go across Oranos to see what kind of platforming puzzles you can skip over. Sorry if I got too negative in parts of this video, but like I explained, I wanted it to be honest criticism so that in the future, things can be better than they already are. And being honest, I think things are already pretty good. I said before that these characters didn't hold my attention too much while going through the main story of this update, but now that I've gone through and unlocked each of their moves and used them to fully map all of Oranos, I must say they've grown on me a lot more than they originally did. I still think my sentiment from my first Final Horizon video was valid, because they really weren't feeling the greatest when you didn't have every ability unlocked, or even worse when you had to backtrack some platforming sections because you didn't have a specific required ability, but now that I'm past those parts in the update, I can say that I'm pretty happy with how these characters turned out, because let's be honest, Sonic Team could have very easily just given us 3 Sonic clones, but instead they gave us these great new characters entirely for free. so I think getting them like they are was a pretty great deal if you ask me. As usual, thanks for watching until the end of the video. I was almost worried that I wouldn't have too much to say about these new characters, but after playing through the game some more with them, it gave me a lot more to go in depth about, so I'm definitely glad I did that. The next video after this one will probably be about Sonic Superstars, hopefully, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that, and other Sonic Frontiers content in the future. Drop a like on this video if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.